Hey guys, I'm Chris Buck, and a very warm welcome to Friday Fretworks. And this week, the Stevie Vaughan signature Stratocaster. Is it worth the hype? So the more observant amongst you probably will have noticed that I actually made a video on this very guitar about 4 years ago, but looking back, wasn't very good to be honest, and it's such a cool guitar that I thought it justified a somewhat better effort. Now despite not being unveiled until NAMM in January of 1992, plans for a Stevie Ray signature Strat actually date back to the late 1980s. So the story goes that for whatever reason, progress on the guitar was slower than expected however. And as such, it wasn't to be until June of 1990 that Fender master builder Larry Brooks and artist relations director Mark Wittenberg were to present Stevie with the first prototype of his signature guitar, just before filming of The Tonight Show with Jay Leno. Stevie apparently loved the guitar, however, as his guitar tech Rene Martinez recalls, there was a problem.
So we didn't even have the SRV on the pickguard, you know. And normally those letters of SRV we had gotten from a truck stop. For some reason, I didn't have those letters, you know, and oh golly, can't play this guitar without the SRV on there, you know. And one of the graphics guys at Jay Leno, Tonight Show, said, you know, we have a graphics department upstairs, you know, what do you need? And I told him, and he came down and he brought 3 different size, same italics SRV letters, you know, and they looked cool and they were new. Different from what we've been used to putting on, you know. So I found the ones that fit just right as far as size, and I peeled it on, put it on there, and it looked cool.
Now Rene would recall that Stevie would actually go on to use the prototype that night for the TV show filming. However, looking at the footage, it seems fairly apparent to me that you are just seeing his usual number 1, albeit with the new lettering having been applied not only to the prototype, but presumably to number 1 as well. You can see how brand new the lettering looks, as well as the fact that that lettering is still on the guitar to this day. There's also a fair amount of evidence to suggest that initial prototype had a roller nut, as we've come to associate with the Jeff Beck Stratocaster, for example, which apparently intrigued Stevie. Now, whatever the truth, one thing we know is that, of course, Stevie would never see his signature guitar reach completion, and of course was killed in a helicopter crash just over 2 months after the filming of that TV show, following a show supporting Eric Clapton at the Alpine Valley Music Theatre in Wisconsin. Unsurprisingly, work on the signature guitar ground to a halt, and it would take his brother Jimmy to finally get the ball over the line, with the guitar being unveiled in January of 1992. Now, somewhat strangely, upon the guitar's introduction, it was listed as having a Brazilian Rosewood fingerboard. You can see that very clearly here in Fender's Frontline catalogue from the time. However, it's estimated that only between 50 and 100 guitars ever left the factory with this appointment before a hasty switch to Pau Ferro, aka Bolivian Rosewood. Fender has never really officially commented on the reason for the change, however, it is suspected to have been as a consequence of Brazilian Rosewood having been included in the updated CITES list as of July 1992. CITES, of course, being the Convention of International Trade of Endangered Species of Fauna and Flora. Whatever the reason, if you can get hold of one of those Brazilian Rosewood Stevie Ray Strats, needless to say, they cost a pretty penny. regard to its other specs, it was of course heavily based on Stevie's own number 1, which featured a 62 Strat neck and a 63 Alder body. Of course, there's been much speculation on the true specifications of that guitar over the years, Stevie having somewhat fueled the fire by erroneously referring to it as a 59 model on more than one occasion. But the consensus seems to be these days that it was as it left the factory, with a late 62 neck and an early 63 Alder body. Of course, crossover guitars like that not being uncommon. Much like the original, signature model features a left-handed, gold-plated tremolo. Stevie, of course, an avid Otis Rush and Jimi Hendrix fan, having changed the bridge on his guitar in around 1977. But unlike number 1, the signature model then continues that gold-plated theme throughout, with a gold-plated jack plate, neck plate, screws, tuning pegs, and of course bridge. The neck, again based on number 1, is definitely on the larger side, Fender describing it as a deep, thick oval. It's cool to see it's actually very close in profile and feel to my own 62 model. And then in regard to the nut, Fender played it safe and went with a synthetic bone nut as opposed to the roller nut. The logic apparently being that as much as Stevie liked it, he'd never really been pictured with it, so it would have seen a little bit as coming out of the blue. Again, much like the original, the guitar comes with jumbo-sized fret wire, as was Stevie's preference, but aside from the SRV engraved pickguard, it is arguably the pickups that really set this guitar apart. The Texas Specials. Initially introduced to accompany the Stevie Ray Strat, the Texas Specials are a feisty set of pickups to say the least. Overwound with an Alnico 5 magnet and enamel-coated wire, the result is significantly more output and upper mid-range than the typical Strat pickups, doubtless in pursuit of that thick, aggressive tone that was a key ingredient in Stevie's sound. Initially, they were exclusive to the Stevie Ray Strat, but such was the public response that it wouldn't be long until Fender would offer them as an aftermarket upgrade. As far as I can ascertain, response to the guitar upon its release was mixed. Guitarist magazine here in the UK being notably nonplussed with the guitar as a whole, but particularly taken with the pickups. But seeing as 2022 marks the 30th anniversary since its introduction by Fender and its continuous production ever since, I think it's safe to say the reaction to the guitar as a whole has been very strong. Now, of course, it was a posthumous release, so the man himself was never really associated with the guitar, but one particularly notable user is, of course, John Mayer, whose 1996 model was used particularly prominently during his ascent to fame, and of course would go on to form the basis of John's own signature model released in 2005. Even John's own signature Fender pickups, the Big Dippers, were heavily inspired by the Texas Specials in John's Stevie Ray Strat, which, as legend has it, were defective from the factory, resulting in a much more mid-scoop sound. Unlike the Texas Specials, however, the Big Dippers were never offered as an aftermarket alternative, and as you can imagine, there's a huge second-hand and clone market as a result. So, what's the verdict? Is the Stevie Ray Strat worth the hype? Well, I guess the first thing to consider is its price. £2,279, roughly $2,700. It is an expensive guitar, which seems slightly incongruous with Stevie having been quoted as saying this was intended to be a guitar for the kids. Guess it is all relative, however, and compared to other American-made signature Stratocaster models, it's roughly the same price, if not slightly cheaper than some of them. Of course, the SRV engraved pickguard won't be for everyone, and I guess will largely limit its appeal in terms of a broader sense, but there is always the option of changing that out, as John Mayer did with his tortoiseshell guard. I'm a big fan of the bigger neck profile and the bigger fret wire in particular, which straight away throws you into that mindset of muscular Stevie-esque blues playing. However, it's the Texas Specials, which for me I'm a little bit more ambivalent about. Even though the pickups in Stevie's own number one had been rewound by the time that he bought the guitar, and as such, I guess there's no real conclusive way of saying to what specifications they had been rewound to, can't help but feel that a lower set or lower output set of pickups would probably be a better way of trying to cop Stevie's tone than simply trying to negate the need for a tube screamer by pushing the front end and mid-range of the amp that much harder with the Texas Specials. Again, I feel it probably limits the pickup's versatility. That said, someone who's had particular problems trying to stand out in a mix with the John Mayer Big Dipper pickups and their scoop mid-range, that's never going to be a problem with the Texas Specials. Overall, if it is Stevie's sound that you're chasing, I honestly think looking at one of the new American Vintage 2 Series Stratocasters could possibly be a better place to start. But if you are looking for that distinctive vibe and aesthetic of Stevie's number one, without spending 50 odd grand on one of the master-built versions that Fender released a few years ago, you can definitely do worse than Stevie Ray Signature Strat. As ever, I'm Chris Buck. Thank you very much for watching. This is Friday Fretworks. Please subscribe, hit the bell icon if you haven't already. Have a great Christmas, and I shall see you next week for another episode. Cheers, guys. See you soon.